Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So two stories that I saw on Sky News that I felt that I had to bring to your attention. The first about the NHS reaching its 75th year, where a Conservative peer, I assume he's a Lord, said, as a nation we're too sick. This is so funny how this is the problem with the world we live in. I know I talk about this a lot on the Pursuit of Truth, but just it's because of I don't know if it is intrinsic nature of humans to lie, but the ability to be able to lie, that's our great weakness as a species, that we've cultivated that bad habit, because it the issue of trust goes out the window when you know that that's possible. But just the way that people in power will lie or mislead, and I don't know whether it's done intentionally or just because they're used to it as being their job. You know, like anyone who works for a company, they then become so loyal that they forget about truth and honesty and all those things, because they want to keep getting their paycheck, I guess. But I don't get it. Like, well, I suppose they can't admit the truth, is it? Because if they admit the truth, then that means they have to admit fault, and no one ever wants to admit fault. Because the reason why the NHS is stumbling, which everyone knows, I mean, all the journalists have been talking about it, is because of the lack of money that the Conservatives have been putting into it for the last 10 years. And it's not just a Conservative issue. I'm sure if Labour were there, they would have done the same thing after the financial crisis. That, I guess the Conservatives would say Labour put the country in, although all countries borrow and no country seem to be in credit. They all seem to be, in debt. So yeah, but now they want to make it out that it's all to do with us being sick. Well, if they really cared about that, if the government of the world really cared about the human beings that it has to look after, then it would stop all these companies putting sugar and salt and selling carcinogenic foods and unhealthy foods. It would have a better food standard agency that would ban all these things. And then you wouldn't have all these sick people. You can't blame the people if you're going to allow the choice out there. Because and that's why they won't do it. They'll say, well, you people are so sick, you need to stop being sick. Stop eating all those Cornish pasties or pies or all those sweets or all that sugar, all that salt. Stop it right now. But you can go to the supermarkets that we regulate and go and buy all that stuff. But don't do it. It's there because it's freedom and it's choice. Well, I suppose, in fairness to their argument, people could do it in moderation. I mean, that's the thing. There's, most things, anything that you put in your mouth is probably unhealthy for you. It's going to end up in your demise, but because it just deteriorates you. But we all have to eat, isn't it? But the problem is, it is very difficult to eat healthy if you're looking for, the way that the government has the green and the red things and the orange, the amber. It's very difficult to find products that have just got green on them, and the good sugar and good saturates and all that kind of stuff. If you go around your supermarkets, and I mean, what they really should do is they should colour code the supermarkets, not in the food, but in what's good for you. I suspect if they did that, most of the shelves would be red or amber, and there'd be maybe like one shelf of green, probably fruit and veg. So it just made me laugh at how they wanted to point it on the people for being sick, as opposed to the money they haven't been putting in and the staff they haven't been getting, and the way that they don't even meet people to agree payment. This is why I don't believe in money, because money is what's causing all this problem. All these people who are dying because of all these strikes and because of the hospitals being in such a situation. I had to go to the hospital with my son a few days ago. And it was just terrible. It was just terrible. I mean, the people, the nurse and doctors or whatever, they're brilliant. But the system, the way now you have to go into A&E and you have to go into an iPad, and everything's full up, so it's difficult to get to them. And then when you go to this iPad, you've got like 30 questions you have to answer. Before you used to go in, to A&E, and you'd say, well, this is, your date of birth, maybe national insurance number and an NHS number, but usually it's just date of birth and your name and what's wrong with you, and that's it. And you go sit down and you wait for, a few hours to be seen. Whereas now you have to fill out all your information about you and the person and etc. And then you just wait when, for people to shout out, or some people weren't even shouting out that loudly, so I don't know, because there were two overfilled areas. And this is just in a seaside town, not London. Imagine how bad it is there. But the problem is that, if you're going to blame people and their intake of food, which, yes, a lot of the things that people get, like cancer and overweight and heart and strokes and things like that, are linked to what we eat. If we really care about that, then we need to do something about diet. We need to make that that we need to stop the people who are making the food, the people who are selling it as well, that they put less salt and sugar into things. They put less additives and the things that cause carcinogenics and stuff like that. You can't say, I know, because the problem is because we live in a free world, that I suppose, that we have to have all these things because, people will protest if we stop selling red meat or red wine or whatever, because people won't do what's for the benefit of them, and because we've had so much of this, because we haven't been educated properly to think. But I suppose it depends. If you want to live a long life, well, then you can choose it. But the problem is if we allow that choice, that then creates this unnecessary NHS backlog because of all these people who are unhealthy because they're not controlling themselves properly. And like I say, it's very difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. Anyway, here's the comment so you can hear it for yourself. So you can have his right to reply.
Tom Cheshire there. Well, joining me now is the Conservative peer and former Health Minister, Lord Bethell. Good evening. Thank you very much for being with us. So, from these health watchdogs, it's a pretty sobering assessment today. A decade of underinvestment, shameful neglect of adult social care. Is the NHS in its current state sustainable?
Well, I thought your polling was very interesting, Mark. And actually what it demonstrates is that the people who actually get service from the NHS do have a very high opinion of it. There is incredible performance in the NHS. We do some of the best medicine in the world. But we have two problems. Firstly, that good performance is not delivered to everyone. It is very, very unevenly spread. And secondly, the amount of sickness that is being thrown at the NHS right now is unsustainable. We are just too sick as a nation. There's just too much junk food, too many mouldy homes, too much dirty air, too many toxic workplaces. And that's where the NHS, I think, is really struggling to keep up.
But the workforce plan, 230,000 more doctors by 2037, I mean, that's fine. But what happened to social care, Boris Johnson's social care plan? What's happened to the new hospitals? Lots of promises, but not a lot of action on those two things.
Well, it's ironic, isn't it? There's never been more doctors, more nurses and more spending on the NHS. And yet you are right, the waiting lists are going up and there is the feeling that the performance isn't good enough. There are three legs to this stool. There's the acute care of treating people who are sick. There's the social care of both the elderly and those who need support of some kind or another. And there's the public health dimension, trying to prevent health and to bring in population measures to keep people out of hospital. We're piling a lot of money into hospitals and secondary care at the moment. But you are right, we are neglecting the other two. And that is contributing to the huge tsunami of sickness being aimed at GPs and secondary care. We've got an unbalanced system right now. We're very committed to free at the point of delivery, and that is correct. But we need a new way of looking at health that does better at rehabilitating people, at trying to create environments for people to make healthy decisions about the way they run their life, and to improve the way in which we live. And if we don't do that, I do worry that the whole thing's going to fall over.
I mean, there will be people probably listening to this saying, look, it's a bit rich after 13 years of a Tory government to say, that we have to have a new look at it.
Yeah, listen, we've undoubtedly made some mistakes. I put my hand up to that.
Oh my God,
but these are problems that all developed countries are looking at. When I speak to my opposite numbers in other countries, they've all got ageing populations, they've got wonderful technologies for treating the sick, but not the money necessarily to pay for it all. Obesity is a pandemic of its own that's particularly hitting Britain hard and America, but is also in other countries. The dementias and the aging diseases are very, very expensive to treat. Yes, we're not the only country that's dealing with these problems.
I know, but what are the worst mistakes you think that have been made in the last decade or so?
I think we've got a mindset problem. There's a problem with the doctrine. We are particularly bad in this country of thinking that the NHS is a cure-all that will pick you up when you're sick and put you back on your feet, and there's nothing else to healthcare that you need to think about. That is just plain wrong, I'm afraid to say. As a government, the government should be thinking about trying to create healthier environments and creating leadership to demonstrate to people that they need to look after themselves a bit. And we need greater balance between secondary care, the hospitals and the acute services, and the public health and the social care. In other words, we need to be preventing disease, not just treating disease.
Well,
and it's just proving to be too expensive to try the old model.
Well, yeah, and that's interesting. And just finally, I mean, the pressure on hospitals and on A&E departments in particular is partly about mental health, alcohol, drugs, and so forth. And where are the community services that would prevent a lot of that ending up in A&E and putting pressure on doctors and nurses in A&E? Where are the community services? Where is the parity that was promised between physical health and mental health?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. It's heartbreaking to me that we have incredible technologies coming down the line through big data, through algorithms, through consumer diagnostics that enable us to put health much more in communities, in people's homes. We saw telemedicine and what could be achieved there. We should be trying to get healthy lives into the practical, everyday routine of the way people run their lives. And instead, we're piling more and more money into these great big battleships of our hospitals. And we do need a complete rethink. We need to be creating communities where people can lead healthy lives, not doubling down on the sickness service. And I hope very much indeed that this anniversary will be a chance for us to rethink that.
Yeah, OK. Lord Bethell, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Actually, I mean, to give him credit, he was talking sense, and at least he admitted for once that they made mistakes. Someone actually admitted they make mistakes. All hail. It's so funny how human beings find that, especially in power, to say that when it's, well, all humans are fallible. And it's learning from these things that makes us better. That's the whole point. Until you admit it, then you can't learn from it. Just carry on making the same mistake. So yeah, but he was right though, that it's all about healthy living. Sorry about the creaky floor, if you can hear that in the background. It's all about healthy living, but the problem is the government's got a hand in that as well, with the Food Standards Agency and company and legislation like that. What is allowed to be sold? We do need less sugar, less salt, less of these red products, more of the green ones. But the problem is there's probably a lot of money tied up in that, and that's where governments probably don't want to start causing problems for Kellogg's or who else makes food, all the big companies that make the food. That's probably bringing a lot of revenue to the country and to the government, and that's probably why they're not saying it. So that's why they're telling us, you need to not eat this stuff, but we can't take it off the shelves because we need to make the money. But if people did start eating healthy, I wonder what the cause would be financially. Anyway, here's the next story that I wanted to bring you, and I've forgotten what it is. What was it about?
Cluster bombs.
Oh yeah, the cluster bombs, of course. Yeah, this struck me as like, it just goes to show you how, even though Ukraine are going to welcome it, it shows you the Western perception. I know, like if this was a war that was in Europe, There's no way that cluster bombs, or if it was a war in Canada, there's no way they'd be sending cluster bombs. And it just amazes me that the three countries that still allow cluster bombs are the United States, Russia and Ukraine, among others. And 100 other countries, including most of Europe and the UK, don't allow them anymore. I believe they didn't they use them in Iraq and Afghanistan? But the problem is with these cluster bombs is they split up in the air, and then a lot of them, some degree, I saw one report saying it was 80% that, 90% of people who are killed by cluster bombs is actually civilians and not actually targets, because a lot of them, some people argue about the amount of, whether it's 30% or whatever that's left that don't detonate. But the fact is that the US doesn't care, because it's not in their background, is it? In their playground, it's in someone else's land. So it's fine for civilians of Ukraine to die. And of course, Ukraine will welcome it because they can use it. And of course, I mean, from a pacifist point of view, killing Russians or Ukrainians, especially civilians, is a big issue. But I don't know, you can't, you lose your moral high ground when you start acting like the enemy, the so-called enemy. Russia are already using cluster bombs, and so the news media was sort of trying to say out that, oh wow, but these cluster bombs that Russia are using are far worse than the American ones, because they find it difficult to go against, because we see America as our friends, and Russia or China or the Middle East is the so-called enemy. So it's easy for journalists, because they've been brainwashed, to forget that we're actually all human beings, irrespective of these little borders that we put ourselves in. But just the way that it's easy, we won't say anything too bad. It's bad, but that's it. But then what was interesting, I don't know if it was after this one, they ran a story sort of saying, the UK doesn't want America to do this. I bet that's not going to stop them. So it's sort of like, we want to show that we don't like it, but we're not going to say anything bad, so they still allow it to happen. So that's an accomplice, isn't it? Legally speaking. And then the story afterwards, they showed that how Russia, people were being injured and the war going bad, sort of like a brainwash to sort of show you that, yeah, this is bad, it is bad, but wait a minute, let me show you what's happened to Ukraine, this is why it's needed to be done. So even though it's against international law by 100 countries, forget about that, because look how bad it is. Yeah, well, I know it's bad. No one wants to see anyone get killed. But that doesn't justify using weapons that are probably going to do more damage to civilians than anyone else, and that's shows that they're not doing very well. And that's like with most countries. That's why in Iraq and Afghanistan, I'm sure they were used, is because when you're losing, the rules and the laws go out of the window, and war just becomes like old-fashioned war, where people just killed each other indiscriminately, and didn't have all these treaties that we now have. And that's why, the UK and the USA and some Western countries, their soldiers were up against The Hague because of their actions in Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam and etc. And the Second World War, I'm sure. Because, they start to use these like mustard gas, or you start to use, these kind of munitions that kill innocent people. You start killing innocent people, or raping them, or pillaging, and all that kind of stuff that happened in the past. So I don't know, it just, for me, I don't like war per se, but it looks so bad that it just shows, I think, that the Western countries are not actually much better. We like to, brainwash ourselves through the media and etc. to think that we're in a better country and we're, whatever, but it's not. They're all the same. Russia, we've been told Russia's bad. I'm sure there were stories last week, that were saying how, look, Russia's using these weapons that, most of people don't use, and look how bad that is. And now America's using them. Well, wait a minute then. So what are you saying now then? Who's the good guy anymore? Well, the truth is there's no good guys. The only good guys are the poor civilians and the poor people who've been brainwashed to fight for people who are sitting in their bunkers, like the Putins, like the Bidens, like the Churchills, like, all those people that don't actually fight and send people out to fight their wars for them. They've been brainwashed to think that they should be fighting for countries. My goodness, if the actual people stopped fighting for leaders, we wouldn't have all these wars. Anyway, here's the story.
A very good evening. Thanks for joining us. The Prime Minister has today reaffirmed the UK's stance against the use of cluster bombs. Rishi Sunak's intervention came after President Biden confirmed that the US would be sending the controversial weapons to the Ukrainian front line. Over 120 countries have banned the use of cluster munitions because of the high proportion of civilian casualties. But the US president, who lands in the UK tomorrow, defended what he described as a difficult decision. The Sky's Ashish Joshi now reports.
Watch this cluster bomb as it is dropped from this jet. Here, before it hits the ground, it's detonated, releasing over 100 deadly mini-bombs. They disperse over a wide area. It's effective, but indiscriminate and highly controversial, and now will be supplied to the Ukrainian army for use against Russia.
I discussed this with our allies, discussed this with our friends up on the Hill, and we're in a situation where Ukraine continues to be brutally attacked.
Cluster bombs are already being used by the Russians in this war, but this move by the US will cause unease among NATO allies, including Britain.
The UK is signatory to a convention which prohibits the production or use of cluster munitions and discourages their use. We will continue to do our part to support Ukraine against Russia's illegal and unprovoked invasion. We've done that by providing heavy battle tanks and most recently long-range weapons.
123 countries have signed a convention banning the use of cluster munitions because they end up killing more civilians than soldiers.
President Zelensky is very short of weapons, and particularly the counteroffensive isn't going well, and he needs to break through the Russian defences, and that's a minefield and a trench system. Bluntly, he could clear those using manpower, but it'd be a huge cost. Instead, cluster munitions offer a way of blowing up the minefield, clearing a path through, and potentially delivering a decisive breakthrough from Ukrainian forces.
Kyiv has assured Washington these bombs will not be used near civilian populations.
This is a war, and we are dealing with an enemy who is killing our civilians every day. But like I said, we will use, and this is clearly written in the position of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, these cluster munitions will not be used in urbanized territories. They will be used only on the battlefield.
President Zelensky has hailed this move as timely as the conflict passes yet another key milestone.
I want to thank each of our soldiers for these 500 days from right here, from this place, the place of victory. Thank you to everyone who fights for Ukraine, and let the freedom that all our heroes at different times wanted for Ukraine, and that must be won right now.
Ukraine's leaders say they need the cluster bombs in their fight against the Russians. And while the Prime Minister has not publicly condemned the American decision to supply the weapons, NATO members are divided. It is sure to dominate the agenda when they meet next week. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Well, with those cluster munitions due to be sent to Ukraine soon, Sky News has seen firsthand the devastating impact of unexploded mines in the region. 500 days after the war began, the much-vaunted Ukrainian counteroffensive is being blocked by Russian defences. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, spent a day in one field hospital in southern Ukraine. I should just warn you, his report does show injured civilians and soldiers.
Sometimes they just wait, killing time in the summer heat, but never for long. As casualties start coming, sent back from the front line. Access there is strictly restricted, but in a day here, we had insights into the battle they're waging a few miles away. Ukraine's counteroffensive is meeting stiff resistance in Russia's defences and minefields.
Everything here is mined. Most of these injuries are caused by artillery shelling, strikes, and minefields our guys have to walk through.
The counteroffensive began using Western-supplied heavy armour, we're told, but mines have slowed Ukraine's advance. Much of the fighting is on foot now, and it's taking a bloody toll. Doctors fight to save ligaments severed by a mortar that's cut deep into a leg. The patient's a medic himself, later telling us he'd been on the front just 3 days before the Russians attacked.
It was a mortar attack. We had just arrived and had to go to our position. Well, we're an assault brigade. We were supposed to go to the position, and drones started flying and bombing us.
Next, what they call a red patient in a critical condition. A burns victim rushed from the front line. As he moans, they work fast to stabilize him, his limbs shaking in pain.
The condition of the patient is serious, taking into account thermal burns, head, upper limbs, back completely, lower limbs. Well, the condition is critical.
The patient needs urgent intervention. He's transferred to an ambulance. His condition kept stable as they race through the traffic. The quicker he reaches hospital, the better the odds. There's a specialist burns unit here, increasing his chances, but his life is still threatened.
He have very big surface that are injured of skin, and unfortunately prognostically it is not so good as it could be.
Ukraine reveals little about its casualty rate in this war, but we've been given a sense of what its soldiers are going through, and it's clearly not getting any easier. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Zaporizhia.
No, it looks like that was, I don't know who engineered that, whether it was Ukraine being clever, knowing that cluster bombs are being used and knowing that most countries in the world don't like it, and they knew this kind of story was going to go on, and that's why they allowed them to go and visit patients that were being damaged by the mines, or whether this was the media searching for the story to back up this, because it's just quite strange that the mine story, because the whole reason for the Americans giving the cluster bombs is to clear these mines that they don't want to do with people, so they want to use the bombs, and that's their justification for it, even though they've never banned cluster bombs. They're not part of the signatory. But for that story to then to come out, because it's sort of, when you watch the first bit and you're told that 120 countries have said no, this is bad, and you can see that it's bad because of how it's going to be, but then you're shown afterwards suffering of these mines, which you know is why they've been sent, and suddenly then it will make your mind think, well, actually I do understand now why this is being done, and that let it be okay then. So it just seems like that's very engineered. So I don't know if that was the media doing that, or whether Ukraine are thinking ahead and thinking perception, and this now makes people, think that it's okay to do this. I mean, what it really shows you is that the stupidity of war, that when human beings want to kill each other, that's when we know we failed as a species, because we only have one existence and we're wasting our time with, imagine all the wasted hours, the hundreds and thousands, maybe millions of hours that have been wasted in making weapons around the world by different manufacturers, the amount of effort, all these people who have wasted their lives making weapons, that these humans, that millions of humans that have died fighting each other for causes that weren't actually going to benefit them, Yeah, I know some of it's about freedom, I get that, but from a sort of outside position, I'm from an inside position. If I was Ukrainian, I'm sure I wouldn't be saying this. I'd be saying that we need to have our freedom, and I would want to be free. I wouldn't want to be enslaved by another country or people that want to kill other people. I get that. I know it's a very difficult subject. Mine is looking at it from a human's perspective of that. Why have we got to the stage where we want to kill each other? And maybe some people say it's a bit too kumbaya and that's not reality. Well, maybe that's true. I want something that just can't be true. I want a place where we don't kill each other, a civilization where we are civilized, where we are human. Because we're fighting over land, we're fighting over, control of land by people who want the powers, and they get the little people like us, the civilians, to fight for them so that they can have power over that land for that short amount of time before they die as well. It just is I don't know, it just seems so... People from 1,000 years are going to look back at this, or an alien species will look back at this and think how stupid we are for having wars and these types of things and having systems that don't benefit humanity. Anyway, that's my waffle for today. Take care, take it easy, God bless and peace.